Welcome back to another episode of the FTD series I've been doing on the redrafting. This has been a really fun series. You just get to go back and see some of the decisions and who's flourished and why and what organizations, and just kind of gives you a quick reminder of like draft value, especially since in this league we're in the draft right now. So been really fun to look back at that really good year with Brumley, Miles, and a bunch of good players there. A couple of these guys struggling this year, actually. And then the second year was really loaded. That was a lot of fun. This class was ridiculous with Kevin Booth, Richardson, a couple superstars, Seifert there, bunch of really good arms at the top there, batting champion Joe Curry. Just some really good players overall. So we extended it all the way to the 14 player. So then this year we're going to start. It's back down to 11 players. Probably in between those two classes, probably a little maybe equal to 2026. But again, it's pretty early, so there's a lot of guys that haven't really produced a ton. I didn't really talk about for this draft specifically. It's not really what they've done so far. It's just like if there was a redraft today, knowing what we know, what they've done so far, but also what they could potentially do in the future. There's like if a guy has 10 WAR, but he had a career-ending injury or something, I wouldn't pick him. So because the reason I did that is because if that was the case, you just sort by career WAR, and it'd be pretty obvious like who the kind of picks were. So this is the really fun year when you get to more recent years where the guys are pretty young so far. The high school guys are barely cracking the majors, so you start to get the tough decisions where it's a mixture of kind of what the older guys, what they've kind of proven so far, and some of the younger guys with some high ceiling that haven't really produced at major league level, but you think they will because their ratings are high and their talent level's high. So this is a really interesting class for that reason. I'm sure the opinions would vary more than the other year. So it'll just get harder and harder as we go through the years too for those decisions. So this one is a blast. The first overall pick is crazy. Originally, it was Manny Lavia. This guy is an absolute beast, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. He had some 160, 150 WRC plus seasons. One of the best offensive players in all of baseball. Normally, you wouldn't draft a first baseman first overall, but these guys are pretty special. This guy's amazing, but there's actually been one better. Mike Williams, I'm going to take first overall in the redraft. He went number 2, so the first pick Lavia is really good, but I think in a redraft, Mike Williams would probably go 1. It's really close, and I know Nationals probably really happy with Lavia, but if you look at their numbers real closely, it just is quite a bit difference in the on-base percentage, which is so valuable at first base. If you look at Mike Williams, he's just an absolute monster. The guy has almost 400 on-base percentage. I think last year it was something in the 420s or something. Just incredible. Showing a lot more power this year than last year, too. So now he's up to 17 home runs in 37 games, over 1,000 OPS. So this guy's pretty much the premier hitter in the entire league, probably him or Carmouche. So I think in a redraft, the fact that he's 23 years old, he is athletic at first base, plays a really good defense. Just going to have him barely going above Lavia. I think the main difference, like I said, was just really the discipline at the plate with the eye. The on-base percentages, like I know this year it's been pretty close, but like the last couple of years, Williams has been about 30, 40, 50 points higher in the on-base percentage with similar stats everywhere else. So I think that was probably the little tiebreaker for me. Plus, he has a World Series ring if you want to look for another tiebreaker. And so those guys are just incredible. So obviously that Lavia is probably going to go number 2 because they're two of the best hitters in baseball and is really close for 1-2. So I'm actually going to flip-flop the order in my opinion, but you can't really go wrong either way. I'm sure some people might like Lavia better. Really, really elite hitter. So we're going to jump to number 3 now. Number 3 originally was a pitcher who's okay. He's like a quad A type pitcher. But in a redraft, we're going to go with the Pat Carlson pick to the Dodgers. You just got to think if they were to pick Pat Carlson to give that lineup another ridiculous hitter. Carlson hasn't produced a ton of the major league level yet. He's only 23 years old, and he's on a last place team, but he's just got a thunder bat. So he's like a 350 on base percentage guy this year. He's on pace for 54 home runs. He is hitting at a crazy 154 WRC plus so far. He cranked the balls out of the park in the minors last couple seasons too. So you just got to imagine that as a left fielder, right fielder / DH, this guy is going to be one of the best hitters in the league for quite a while. So I know there's some pretty good arms and other things in this class so far, but just with such a top-notch bat, it's really tough to pass on him, especially as a lefty, mashes righties. So you got to imagine that he's going to be a middle-of-the-order elite hitter for the next decade. So that was a little trickier of a pick. He's not quite in the same tier as those top 2 guys, but he's pretty far above the average hitter in the league. So that was a really interesting top 3 because you get pretty much DHs and first baseman all 3 picks. But They are all really freaking good at what they do, so that was the reason there. Next pick, we have an interesting one. Original pick was Tim McNamara, who's pretty decent, got a big hit stick, just doesn't quite have the power for to be a top level first baseman. So in the redraft, we're going to go with Clint Jones. Clint Jones is just your perfect number 3-4 starter. He's produced a little better than that within a really top launch team, really good producing team. Made the World Series last year. And so he got the tiebreaker over some pitchers that probably have a little more raw talent than him when it comes to like stuff and juice in their fastballs and stuff. But the really good movement control, as you can see here, he just barely walks anybody. 4.5, 3, and 4% walk rates over his last 3 years. The ERAs are just ridiculously low. The FIP's a bit higher, meaning the defense is pretty good. The on-base percentages from enemy batters have been below 300 every single year. Lets up a bunch of runners when it comes to base runners, just because he lets up a little decent amount of contact. He's at 9 and 8 and 7 the 3 years for hits per 9, but with the fact that he has a good defense behind him, it kind of plays to it pretty well. So just the fact that he's produced back-to-back 3 WAR seasons, on pace for a 5 WAR season this year, just makes him a clear cut above the other guys so far in their career. But again, pitchers are always really tricky. It wouldn't surprise me if I were to rearrange this list in a year or two once you see some of these other arms coming up. Next up, we have Chris Logan, the other arm. So Chris Logan, this is a tough one. I thought about that one for a while, and for some of the reasons I just said, I placed the Clint Jones ahead of Logan. But Logan had a spectacular Rookie of the Year season last year. It's just that pretty much Clint Jones done it 2 years, where Logan's just done it 1 in the majors. But Logan was pretty solid last year's Rookie of the Year, and then they had a really ridiculous start. If you look at the previous 5 games on that screenshot, you'll see the bottom 2 both say 9 innings, 0 earned runs. So that's one of the craziest back-to-back starts I've ever seen. He's got absolutely lit up since then. Although this last start was pretty good, actually. 8.1 innings, 3 runs, 3 solo shots. But he has just been an incredible control guy. He has pitched 44 innings this year, and he's only walking 1.7% of batters. That's just unbelievable. So that's probably like 3 walks, like 140 batters or something like that. Just incredible control. That really just separates him. The really good fastball, curveball, changeup. Really good at everything. A lot high hold, high stamina. Just a really nice finesse pitcher. Essentially just lets up a few more home runs than your average pitcher, but he is just so good at everything else. He's just going to be a real consistent arm for a long time, and a really good fit with that Nashville team, young team there. So you have 2 guys drafted by Nashville already this draft, which is pretty crazy. The original picks I have in this section, so originally he didn't go till the 5th round. These other 4 were all top 31 picks, or sorry, all top like 50 picks there. So Chris Logan, our first really good pick there in the later rounds. Next up, we have RJ Craig. RJ Craig was an 8th rounder, which is crazy. RJ Craig is a guy that's playing a lot of first base this year, probably a little better fit in left field for most teams. It just fits a need in Minnesota playing first base there, but really good left fielder with 60 range and 50 arm. Almost could play center field, but really solid rangy left fielder. Really good at both first base and left field, like a 65 and 70 rate, as you can see there. Could play a really good right field too with that range, but a little better fit in left field with the weaker arm. But just an incredible bat. This year alone, last year he was pretty mediocre, about 100 league average WRC plus. But as you can see, this year he's on pace for 38 home runs. He is a 152 WRC plus guy. So when you have a guy that's that good of a defender, pretty decent athleticism, plays a really good defender at 2 spots, and has that kind of eye. On base percentage, 16.7% walk rate is just amazing. That's probably top, that's like a 98th percentile type thing. Only like the Juan Sotos of the world are a little above that, like 18%. Just incredible skill set with the patience at the plate and power. That's the main 2 you look for, but also has really good bat on ball. So the overall bat profile is awesome. He's probably, it's one of those kind of interesting profiles where you first look at it and you're like, the gap power contact a little low, the defense is okay, but the more you look at him, the better he seems to get, or at least in my opinion there. So that was an awesome 5th and 8th round pick back to back there. So that was Minnesota picked him. Next up, Baltimore. Unfortunately, the old GM before I took over traded him away. Brandon Shin is awesome. Brandon Shin was a 4th round pick, and he has just developed so interestingly. It's awesome. So as you can see there, in 2032 and 33, he was a reliever. Both years was awesome. Had a 2.9, a 3.6 ERA, and he had really good strikeout numbers, and just had a little bit of walk and control problems last year, but he just keeps progressing like crazy, and he actually turned into more of a starter. So they moved him to the starting rotation this year, and he has just been lights out. A 3.8 ERA. He is on pace for almost 4 WAR so far. He really limits the hits, and he really limits the home runs. That movement is incredible. 1 home run per 9 is really good. He just is awesome. The control is mediocre, but everything else about that profile kind of screams number 1 or 2 starter. So, and he's proving that this year with the year he's having. So really, really interesting. That's why I love doing these lists, because I think I had glanced by this guy's profile a couple times, but wouldn't even have remembered who he was if you just said the name Brandon Shin off the top of my head without having to look on someone tell me what team he was on or something. So just really like doing this list, because you see a guy like this, and you're like, holy smokes, this guy is really close to being an ace. Like if you got 1+5 in control or something like that, he would probably just essentially be like a top 10 pitcher in baseball. He's that good when it comes to the 97-mile-an-hour extreme ground ball fastball with that kind of movement. He just strikes out everybody, doesn't let up home runs. It's all this modern game seems to be about. So just incredible, incredible talent there. Next up, we have Ramon Rosas. And again, I probably would have put Shin a bit higher if he would have produced a little bit more so far. Like, I think I probably, in hindsight, probably should have had him above Logan or Jones, but it's just too hard with the years they've had and how much they've shown so far. But I think by the end of this year, next year, wouldn't surprise me one bit if Shin jumped up all the way to like number 3 on this list if you were to do it again next year. He just has an incredible ceiling. Ramon Rosas here is really close to Shin, really, really similar results. He had a really interesting year last year. He had some really hot and cold streaks from what I remember in Miami. Played with a team that didn't make the playoffs, and this year doing a lot better, and he's doing a lot better. He is off to a phenomenal start. He is limiting the home runs and limiting the walks really well. The strikeout rate's about average. Should be even better, probably. The fact that it's only at 18% when he has that kind of juice and 101 miles an hour makes me think he should be playing, which is crazy, but even better than he is. So this guy is another guy. I think Shin and Rosas both have the potential to develop into aces, where I think Logan and Jones are probably more number 2, 3 type starters. Rosas is just incredible. 101 miles an hour, 6'5" stuff, an elite changeup, 4 pitches, all major league quality. Just an awesome profile. It's my favorite thing in the world when their best pitch is a changeup. You just got to think he'd be like Sandy Alcantara in Miami there. The fact he can throw that hard, 101 stuff, but then also have that good of a changeup, and all he's missing is the amazing slider that Sandy has. But just a really, really cool sorry, I was thinking Sandy, but because he throws like the 93-mile-an-hour slider, that's what I was getting mixed up there. But yeah, just a really interesting profile. I really think he, again, him and Shin, will keep an eye on. I think they could both jump up real high here. Just an awesome class so far. Jeff Levy is next up here. Jeff Levy has been to 2 World Series on Detroit. He has been a starter, and you'd think he probably could be a little higher on this list. It's just this is really good, and I just didn't think he was at this point really like a better player than like Shin and Craig and those guys. It's really close though. Like him and Craig are probably interchangeable, so it was really tough to kind of put him this low. I think I could have made a good argument putting him 5th or 6th, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But he's at 9th here. He is on pace for almost 5 WAR this season. Plays a really, really top-notch defense at third base. Has a few small flaws in this game. Doesn't hit with much gap power or contact, but he's showing the rating might be wrong by my scale, because he's actually hitting 280 this year and having a fantastic year. Pretty solid 260 batting averages last couple of years too, so the bat pip's pretty good. Just overperforms his ratings a bit with the contact stuff and hits for a bunch of power. Last year, he only had 11 home runs. He's still 2.2 WAR. And so with 55, 60 power, he should be having a lot more than 11 home runs. I know Detroit, it's a little tough to hit home runs sometimes, but yeah, that's a really talented player. I probably just penalized him for personal being stupid, like the mentals and stuff. But I think, yeah, that's kind of like a really similar profile to Craig. Both those guys have kind of like the lower contact with a really high eye and power. So it's really interesting how similar those two players are, and they're pretty close to each other in the rankings here. So that was a really, really good player there for 9th overall. And then 10th overall, we have Jacob Holloway. Jacob Holloway is having a rough year this year, so you'd probably think he'd be a little high on this list. But when you see what he did in 2032, in 2033, he had a 138 WRC plus, one of the best hitters in the league at 22 years old that season, in a tough ballpark to hit in, 32 home runs. So that showed his incredible ceiling. And then last year he still had a 112 WRC plus. And then this year he's really struggling. But I think going into this, I thought he was going to be in the top 3 or 4 until I found some more of those good players above him. But Holloway, I think, again, he's struggling, but I think he could bounce back in a big way. And at 24 years old, switch hitter, that good a profile, elite base running, good athlete, can play left field at a decent level, really good first base. Just really good profile overall, really good hitter. Probably be one of the best players on my team if he was on my team and a few other teams. So just a really interesting profile in there. I really like that guy's just kind of solid at everything, and overall as a hitter, just hits for a little bit of power, hits for a little bit of gap power, has a pretty decent eye, and then just has really good bat on ball with some athleticism, big, strong switch hitter. So just really all checks almost every single box you look for there. And next up, the last pick here, I couldn't leave off. I added an 11th in. Victor Zayas here is just one of the better relievers in baseball, so I thought I'd tick him on at the end here. Where I know you don't usually draft relievers that high in redrafts, also the same as DH and first base, and they went 1, 2, and 3. So 11 here, I think he deserves it just with how ridiculous he's been. He is only 27 years old, and he's been one of the best relievers in baseball for years now. And he pitches so many innings; he's almost like a hybrid reliever starter with almost 90 innings the last 2 seasons each year. And he's on pace for another 77 innings this year. So just on one of the best teams in baseball, won a World Series, one of their key cogs in the bullpen, definitely deserves to be on the list. Strikes out a ton of guys, limits the walks, is actually having a career year with only allowing 5% walk rate this year. It's at 8% the last couple of years. And the home runs are a little bit up, but normally limits those pretty well too. He lets up a decent amount of contact, but he's kind of good at everything else at limiting the walks, home runs. So just a really, really good all around reliever that has two incredible pitches. Pitches to both sides of the plate with a fastball slider. Doesn't have that cross action, so does good against lefties and righties. Has a ton of stamina, so just has really everything you look for and a really, really, really solid bullpen ace type talent. So that's the list for this year. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode.